For the amateur players, I want to first address what sort of hurdles are you facing when you're trying to become a winning poker player. First off, the games are tough. There's no arguing that for sure, and they're going to continue to get tougher. I envision the skill level in poker as kind of a curve. During the last couple of years, the march up the curve has been pretty sharp. Now it's kind of starting to flat out a little bit more as profit margins become thinner, as the skill level is already fairly high. While there's always going to be room to improve, there's not that, like when I started 4 or 5 years ago and we were at the very low end of the curve. It's not like there's just miles of improvement left to go, and so you as an amateur player without a lot of experience are way behind the curve, and each level of the game is at a different point in the curve, and so your skill level may win at one level but not win at another, and it all comes down to the number of mistakes that you're allowed to make at the level of poker. At the level of poker that you play. So when you play, for example, 200 no limit, you're only allowed so many mistakes before it just eats up. And a mistake is either a leak or a missed opportunity. And you're only allowed so many mistakes before your win rate is eaten up. If you can make less mistakes, miss less opportunities, miss fewer opportunities than your opponents, then that's where your win rate comes from. Now, through things like rigorous table selection, playing on a site that's softer. All those things are going to, reduce that mistake level for that stake. So your number of mistakes can be lower and you still have a win rate, or your win rate can be bigger, just because the space between the number of mistakes you make and the max number of mistakes allowed is just greater. So kind of envision it that way, and so you've got to catch up with that curve. Maxim Gladwell a couple years ago wrote a book called Outliers, and in it one of the things he wrote about was the 10,000 hour rule, where it took 10,000 hours for someone immersion. It took 10,000 hours of immersion in a subject for the person to become an expert at it. And so people that complete that 10,000 hours early, or as quickly as possible, are going to have an advantage. And in a poker, well, I don't think that's necessarily, I think there's a lot of other factors that go into people being successful. I definitely think in poker there's that time issue where, as a newer player, you've got to get that 10,000 hours in. I know when I first started out, I really had no idea what I was doing my first million hands. Luckily, the games were a lot softer then, and I was able to still win money not knowing what I was doing. But I just had no feel for the game. I looked at my hand, I looked at the board, and that's about it. I didn't think about my opponent's ranges, what they are repping, how often they were bluffing or value cutting themselves. There was none of that involved. Either, pretty much I had a hand or I didn't have a hand, and if I had a hand, I was going to bet until they stopped me, and I certainly had no intention of folding that hand at pretty much any point. And luckily at that time, the number of mistakes that were allowed was rather low, especially when compared to today's game, and so I was able to still win very nicely, even though my hand reading skills were basically non-existent, because at the same time I was also very good at using a HUD and being able to, for example, pick out players that folded a lot to 3-bets to 4-bets, players that 3-bet a lot or 3-bet very little, and adjusted my game to take advantage of their leaks, but after about a million hands, the skill level had gotten to the point where I could no longer make my hand reading mistakes. My use of a HUD was not enough to overcome those mistakes, and so I was forced to either play life as a break-even player or slightly winning player, and eventually a losing player, I'm sure, or learn to hand read, and luckily I became a much better hand reader, and my number of mistakes reduced, and every day that's my goal, is to reduce the number of mistakes I make. So first off, your very first hurdle is you've got to get your skill level up to the point where you are hitting that basically that mistake threshold, and you're below that mistake threshold, or above it, however you want to think about it. You're making fewer mistakes than is required to break even. The second thing is rake. Rake is just absolutely brutal. I read a PTR article on it a while back, and if I recall correctly, at 5 cent, 10 cent, I think the rake is 14 or 15 big blinds per 100. At 25 cent, it's at 25 no limit, it's I think 12. At 50 no limit, 10. 100 no limit, 7.5. 200 no limit was 6. I'm pretty sure that those numbers are really close, but that's a lot of money that you're giving up that in order to establish your win rate at the tables. It's very difficult to have a significant win rate at 10 cent and 25 cent, simply because you're paying so much in rake. It's certainly players do it, and it's certainly possible, but if you are learning the game at those levels, definitely keep that in mind, that you're playing those levels to learn the game, not necessarily to build your role there. Because I've coached guys that feel like they should be winning, 10 or 20, big blinds per 100 just because of the level they're playing. Well, the rake is such a huge impact, such a drain on your win rate. It's really tough to overcome that by a significant amount. It's really no limit 100 where the rake becomes manageable, where you can achieve a decent win rate. And that's not to suggest that you need to start playing at no limit 100. It's to suggest that your goal should be different when you're playing down lower. Your goal at playing that level is to learn the game cheaply, not to have a killer win rate and then build your way up to the next level. That may well happen, and that's great if it does, but don't play that level. Don't play the 10 cent and 25 cent levels with that expectation of a monster win rate before you prove to yourself that you're ready for the next level. Play good solid poker, get a win rate, and then when you feel ready, move up, because you need to get yourself to a level that the rake is not going to eat you alive. Lastly, there's variance. The long run is very, very long in this game. It's very possible for a winning player to have a 100K break even or even losing stretch. I had a period in 2010 where I broke even for 250,000 hands. I ran 105 buy-ins under EV, and it took me 250K hands to pull myself out of that bad run. And that was definitely a huge outlier as far as how frequently something like that's going to happen. That's probably, I think I calculated, as like a one time in 8-year type run or something like that. And hopefully I never ever see anything like that again, because that was absolutely brutal. But in more realistic terms, as a casual player, you're maybe able to play 5,000 hands a week. If it takes 100,000 hands before you get an idea of if you're a winning player or not, and even if you are not winning, it may just be variance. If you're just winning if you're just losing like one big blind per 100, it could just be variance, and that could be where your win rate or why you're losing there. And so it gets very tough to evaluate your game. And so by the time you've gotten to 100,000 hands, at 5,000 hands a week, that's taken you 20 weeks, a significant portion of time. But your game's gotten a lot better over that time. So you get to the 100,000 hands, you're still not winning money. We'll often say to ourselves, well, it's possible it's variance, but my game's gotten a lot better, so even if it wasn't variance and I was a loser, I think I'm now a winner. And so it really becomes a vicious circle in which it's very difficult, especially as a casual grinder who can't get in, say, 100, 150,000 hands a month, for you to get in a sample size that's going to establish a good indication of your win rate without your game having changed so much during that period that you're now playing a significantly different game, hopefully a significantly better game. And so you can get in situations, you see this more with professional players who used to win and no longer win, where they'll have a 500,000 hand break-even stretch, and because they're constantly saying, well, it could be sample size, and then they're saying, well, now my game's better, and they just keep going through this cycle, but it's truly, they're truly break-even poker players. And that's one of probably my biggest motivation for doing this is I would constantly be coaching guys on stars, and I would be coaching guys on stars, say playing 25, 50 cent or 50 a dollar, and I would see guys that a couple years ago I'd played at say 3-6 and thought they were quite good, and then I'll go over to PTR and check out how they've been doing, and there they are breaking even for the past year. And I don't know. I just started thinking about, what's going on with their game. Why are they not winning? And thinking about the guys I had coached that were in similar situations, and that was kind of the reason I thought I'd do this series, because I just see so many players that used to win but no longer are. But obviously I'm starting with amateur players first, and I'll move on to those professional players in the next video. So I hope the hurdles that are facing you don't dissuade you from chasing your poker dream. If my description of the current state of poker does do that, then you probably pretty low chance that you would have been successful anyway, because it takes a borderline fanatical desire to win at this game, I think, to become a winner at this game, simply because you really got to immerse yourself in the game. You've got to love the game. You've got to be thinking about the game. When you're driving down the road, you're thinking about hands. When you're trying to sleep at night, you're thinking about hands. And it's just that level of intensity that's required for most players, most non-savants, to win at this game. Certainly in my case, that's the type of dedication that was required. And luckily, I still do love the game, and I love talking about it and thinking about it and working on it. And that's what's allowed me to stay in the game for so many years. Next, casual players, they don't know how to use the tools available. They'll have a HUD up, but not really understand it. They Hold'em Manager is just a place that stores their hands and they see results. They might use a poker stove some. They probably don't use hands like Flopzilla, Card Runners EV, and other more complex programs. I mean, at the very least, you've got to be proficient in Poker Stove and Hold'em Manager, and then using your HUD, and you probably need to be using all the tools. And there's only one way to do it. It's just get in there and start using those tools, figuring them out, and through experience, you're going to become proficient at them. Certainly if someone's done a video somewhere on them, that'll be a great starting point. And that's where I always start when I want to learn a new tool. Is I look for videos on how to use it, and then I copy what they've done, and then I branch out from there. Lastly, they have undefined goals. They get in there and they just play, and they just figure I'll play and improve, and then I'll achieve my goals. The last thing we're going to talk about is how to define your goals, how to make a plan, and it's extremely important that you have a detailed plan on how you're going to achieve your goals in poker of becoming a winning poker player. But I'll talk about that in the last section.